Hello everyone and welcome back to DC Central, and in this video we're going to be breaking down and reviewing Arrow Season 8 Episode 10, otherwise known as the season finale, otherwise known as the series finale of my favourite show of all time, which is of course Arrow. And if you have not seen this episode, make sure you do so before proceeding with this review, as it will be filled with spoilers. So the time has finally arrived. It's a day I never wanted to see, but we have finally reached the end of Arrow, the show that kicked off the entire Arrowverse, a revolutionary show on television, a show very much inspired by Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, which created and spawned this universe that has just gone into something else entirely. And of course, we wouldn't have the superhero TV landscape today if it wasn't for Arrow. So to get to the end of its 8-season run, it's an emotional day, it's a sad day, and of course, this is my favourite show of all time. So to see it come to an end, it's a moment I never wanted to see. It's bittersweet, but of course, all good things must come to an end. So let's just get into it and let's talk about it. So what I found interesting about Fadeout as an episode is that they did bring back the flashbacks. Now, of course, flashbacks are such a huge part of Arrow. They always were, especially in the first 5 seasons. They were a huge part of Arrow. And to bring them back for this episode, it felt timely and it felt appropriate. And these particular flashbacks really dealt with the relationship between Oliver and Diggle. And I really like that, because one of my huge complaints with Season 8 is that they've spent so much time and they've been so busy setting up these other things that what they haven't done is been wrapping up the storylines of the main characters, and mainly Diggle and the relationship between Oliver and Diggle. That's just not been wrapped up. And this felt like the best way possible, given the time they had remaining, to wrap up that friendship and that brotherhood in a way that felt satisfying. And while I still feel like it was lazy in a way, and it was a way that, you know, felt forced because, again, they had such limited time and they spent too much time doing other stuff, given what it was and looking at it at face value, it was really nice. And these flashback scenes, again, they just helped to kind of bring their relationship full circle for this final episode. And it also gave us an absolutely, and I mean incredibly awesome fight scene. This fight scene that Stephen Amell did, I couldn't believe how amazing it was. It was essentially one take for a lot of it. They did a lot of really awesome action choreography. James Bamford, who of course directed this episode, has been the stunt coordinator on Arrow since season 1. Just seeing him handle this was so fantastic. And this was a season 1 fight scene through and through. This wasn't like Oliver Now, where he kind of goes around, just punches everybody. This was him using arrows. He was killing people, and it felt so good. This was literally what Arrow was like back in season 1. Those fight scenes where they were gritty and they were grounded and they were nail-bitingly angry. Like, Oliver was just a force of nature that could not be stopped. That is what this fight scene was, and it felt so good. I've heard, you know, in the run-up to this episode, and just even to the run-up this season, James Bamford was talking about how he had a fight scene in the final episode which might be the best he's ever done. And while I'm not fully prepared to say that quite yet, I'd have to think about that. It's definitely up there. It's amazing. Bam did an incredible job with this, and to see him kind of, you know, as his final episode to direct and to do a stunt, you know, fight scene, he couldn't have gone out with a bigger bang than this. And these flashbacks overall, again, they just felt timely to bring them back for the final episode. Now, returning characters was a huge thing in this. First of all, I would like to say Ragman officially returned in this episode. I've been waiting for Ragman to return properly for so long. So good to have him back. We actually got to see him in the suit again. The rags work, everything, amazing. Hopefully we see Ragman again at some point, be it in the spin-off or maybe, you know, I would still like him to go to Legends. But other characters who we could talk about, I mean, Roy and Thea both return. Now, Roy and Thea both are obviously still alive, so they were fine coming back, and obviously they actually get married in this. They get engaged. So that was wrapping up their story. I thought it was really nice that they actually gave them a happy ending, because Roy and Thea were a really good couple on the show. So to rekindle that, it felt nice. And again, to kind of put them in that engagement perspective, I felt like it just fit the characters well. And, you know, who knows if we'll see Roy and Thea again, but what's good about it is that I feel like they've wrapped up their story in a way that feels satisfying and where we don't necessarily need to see them again. If we do, it'll be nice, but, you know, I don't really feel like there's any story left to tell with Roy and Thea, so I am happy with that. Quentin came back. Quentin back from the dead. Essentially what Oliver did is when he created this new multiverse, by the end of Crisis, he brought back a bunch of people who died on the show. Quentin came back. He's still mayor at this point. He's about to give the mayoral role to Renee, but also the scene he had with Laurel in this episode was fantastic. especially because Laurel was dealing with the dilemma that, you know, Oliver brought all these people back, but he didn't bring back Earth 1 Laurel because she was still around. That was a really great conflict, and to kind of see her go through that with Quentin, get one final scene of Lance and his daughter, it just felt really great. And again, it just shows how awesome Paul Blackthorne is. And speaking of Arrow parents, we also had the return of Moira Queen. Susanna Thompson made a return. Of course, she returned earlier in the season, but she's come back again here. Really great to have Moira back. I love Moira. And it's awesome how they kind of took that deleted scene from Arrow Season 2 and they played it at the beginning of this episode to show the fact that the timeline had changed and that Moira didn't get killed by the hand of Slade, and instead she was actually saved by Oliver and therefore is still alive to this day. I thought that was awesome. The fact they worked her into that documentary that we saw last season, really nice. So it was great, and every time Susanna shows up, it's always a joy. It's a shame she didn't actually have any scenes with Steven himself, because those scenes always do really well for me. But, you know, I'll take what I can get here. And Tommy also returns. Tommy, actually, we find out, is married to Earth 1 Laurel in this. Now, in this universe, of course, as I mentioned earlier, Earth 1 Laurel is still dead. But when she was alive, she actually ended up marrying Tommy as Tommy lived on. So, again, nice little tidbit there to find out that they were married. That kind of makes sense, given where their characters were by the end of Season 1. It makes a lot of sense, so I'm really happy for that. And it was nice to have Tommy back, as always. And of course, there were plenty of other returning characters and things like that. Like, it was really nice to see, like, Nyssa again for the final episode. Talia was here and stuff like that. Other, you know, there was plenty of returning characters. But I do have an issue with the returning characters, which, although I understand it was completely fan service and it was there just because this is the final episode, we can get people back, and they had a way of kind of changing the timeline so that people could be alive again. It does kind of feel like it eliminates the consequences of the show. The fact that these big characters who had these big death scenes have all kind of just come back to life. The consequences of the show have kind of been eradicated by that for me. It feels like that they had no reason to do that. They just did it because they did it for fan service, and I don't think that's a great way to go about it. Similarly to my problem with the Crisis crossover, it's just, I don't see why that was necessary. And it gets even worse when they try to explain it, because there's literally a scene where Moira and Thea are stood over Robert's grave and they say, oh, why didn't you bring Robert back? And Moira says, very off the cuff, says, oh, it must be just because it was people who didn't affect him in his life who he could bring back. Because, you know, without Robert, he wouldn't have become the Green Arrow and been set on the path, etc. But then how come Tommy's back? Because Tommy died, and then Oliver completely changed his outlook on being a vigilante and stopped killing people. So, you know, the fact that the logic behind it really makes no sense. And again, it just kind of makes the consequences of the show feel wrong. Like, Moira was such a big death in Season 2. That was such a huge moment, and that's been completely gone. Tommy, again, similar thing. Huge moment in Season 1. Completely eradicated. Quentin, very, very emotional death in Season 6, and then that's been gone. So, again, the returns, while they were nice and, you know, it was there for fan service, I didn't particularly enjoy the logic behind it, and again, I feel like it completely removes a lot of consequence and tension from the show, which is a shame to do on your very final episode. Now, the funeral scene was very nice. I was very happy with this, just because they're all kind of stood around, no one knows what to say, and they don't know who to say it to, and I really like the fact that Felicity, who of course also returns, we'll get to Felicity in a bit, she looks at Diggle and she says, it should be you, and I was very happy with that, because it should be Diggle. It should be Diggle. Diggle is the one who has been there from day one. He's Oliver's brother. He should be the one to do it. And I felt like the season has completely sidelined Diggle in this final season, and it's been really annoying for me. So it felt satisfying to me to actually say, right, yeah, Diggle, it should be you to do this big final speech and this big final monologue. And he did it, and it was very powerful. It felt right, it felt true, and it really felt like it was coming from the heart of not just Diggle, but David Ramsey as an actor. And that was really nice to see. And I think that this funeral scene was made all the better because of it. And this funeral scene, we also got Barry and Kara, of course, the Flash and Supergirl showing up, which was nice. It made sense for them to be there, especially because, you know, Oliver is kind of in this position because of them, really. So it made sense for them to be there. So that was nice. And yeah, it was a nice little funeral scene. Again, the logic of people coming back for this funeral makes no sense. Like, even Emiko came back, which was weird, and that brings up a lot of questions about her. Like, was she still evil and then turned back to good, or was she never evil? Like, again, there's a lot of questions there. So it swings and roundabouts with it, but again, I think Diggle leading it was definitely a good decision. And Diggle almost being the lead of this episode, again, felt good, and it felt like they were paying their respects to him as a character, given the fact that they've completely disrespected him the entire season. And they couldn't have given Diggle any more respect than actually finally paying off that fan theory that has been around since season 1. Of course, if you've seen the episode, you know what I'm talking about. A meteorite is heading towards Earth, and it crashes into Diggle, and he looks inside of it, and what does he find? A mysterious, glowing green light. Of course, this confirming the theory that Diggle is going to become a Green Lantern. This is pretty awesome. Even though, again, my problem with this season has been that it's been super sci-fi, and, you know, it's not felt like Arrow in any way. It's not been grounded. And while the concept of Diggle being a Green Lantern has always been a difficult one for me to grasp, just because, again, I've always seen him as a grounded character. I don't know why they have to make him a version of Jon Stewart. I've never seen why that was necessary. I would be lying if I said it didn't bring a big smile on my face to see that fan theory finally come into fruition. Just seeing him with that green light, he looks great. Different question if we'll see him again. I mean, there is a chance he could show up on the Superman show that's coming out. Of course, he does mention in this episode that he's moving to Metropolis, so there is a chance of that. There's also the HBO Max Green Lantern show coming out, which it depends if they connect that to the Arrowverse or not. And I mean, Greg Berlanti's behind it, so there is a chance. So he could play Jon Stewart on that show. But it's really cool just to actually see him become a Green Lantern, or at least start his journey towards that. Because it's a really cool thing with Diggle, because they did wrap up his story in this episode, and to kind of put a tease there for what they could do in the future with him is nice. Because again, I feel satisfied with Diggle's ending in some way, but it's nice to kind of have that little tease. So if they want to do something with him in the future as Green Lantern, they could do that. I mean, I think it's even equally plausible that we could see him show up in the next crossover, or even the crossover after that. He could show up as a version of Green Lantern and kind of save the day and do a big moment, big reveal, which would be awesome for everybody. So again, I think it's awesome just to finally pay that off and finally confirm that, as it's been around since the very beginning of the show. And I at last want to talk about the ending scene of the episode and the end scene of the series. So the ending of this series and this episode is essentially a wrap-up to the ending scene of Season 7, which, if you remember, took place in the flash forwards, and we saw the older version of Felicity meet with the Monitor, and he took her to see Oliver. And, of course, we saw them step through the portal, and that was where Season 7 ended. With this, we actually get to see where Felicity goes. So Felicity goes through the portal, and also, can I just say as well, the Monitor being there makes no sense. The Monitor died in Crisis, so how is he alive? Whatever. Another problem there. But she walks through the portal, and she actually ends up in the office of Queen Consolidated, and we see Oliver step through the door. Now, this location choice makes sense. This is where Oliver first met Felicity, or at least first saw Felicity, which it does kind of flash back to Season 3, and we see that moment. So that makes sense. My problem with this is, again, I hate to keep going back to it, but this is my problem with this season as a whole. This whole scene takes place in the afterlife. And the afterlife, to me, is not a plausible concept. The afterlife, to me, I've not died. I don't know what's going on after death, but the idea of the show taking place, like this final scene taking place in the afterlife, it feels too sci-fi to me. It feels too ungrounded, if that's a word. It doesn't feel like Arrow. And this last scene, like, Oliver's just been living in the afterlife. Like, this is like the only proper scene we get with Steven that isn't a flashback. And he's just hanging about in the afterlife, and then Felicity shows up there, and this version of the afterlife looks exactly the same as, you know, just regular life. I just think it's dumb. I think it's really dumb. I was watching it, and while, you know, my emotions get the better of me with Arrow because I'm so connected to the show and I love it so much and things like that, that, you know, I was crying my eyes out in this final scene. I was absolutely bawling my eyes out just because I love the characters, but, you know, upon reflection as time goes on, and even watching it, I was like, this is dumb. Like, this is ridiculous. The fact that this show that started out as this grounded, gritty, realistic take on the superhero genre is ending with this season that is just filled with different sci-fi elements, setting up this big, bombastic crossover where Oliver turns into this character who is just this huge, godlike being, and then he dies, not even on his own show, and then ends the season in the afterlife. And Felicity literally goes to the afterlife with him, leaving their children behind. I don't get it. It feels stupid to me, and I feel like that this series, this isn't what we were promised. This isn't what was meant to be. And I don't want to sound like someone who is super disappointed with the series finale, because I know that's so many different shows. Like, there's so many different shows. Like, series finales are so difficult to pull off. And I don't want to sound like I'm just complaining about it, but I've got to be honest with you guys. I don't like this ending. I don't like it. And I've always been, you know, I always knew it was going to be this way when this season began, because I knew that this season was going to be the way it was. But I just didn't expect this. I didn't think it was going to be like this. I didn't think it was going to end like this. I really hoped that they wouldn't do something like this. I mean, I still don't think they should have killed Oliver. I think that's a bad decision. I think that Oliver doesn't have to die at the end of the series. I don't think that was a necessary decision. But to end it in the afterlife, to end it in a false world, I just think that's really dumb. I think it's really dumb, and I don't like it. I think it's a poor decision on the writer's part. I don't like it. And to be honest, in my headcanon, I kind of consider this season to be a bit of a spin-off. Like, for me, in my headcanon, Arrow ended with season 7, where Oliver and Felicity retired and went to raise Mia. That's where it ends for me. Because this season, because that's, for me, that was a logical, as Stephen Amell has said himself, that was the logical conclusion to the show. That was the logical ending. The city was saved. He left the city to Team Arrow, to Diggle, Renee, and Dinah, and he went off to raise Mia. That was the logical conclusion to the show. But they just had to do one more season, and it was a season that didn't feel like Arrow. It didn't feel like the show that I knew and I loved so dearly. And I don't want to sound like an entitled fanboy, but this isn't what I wanted. This isn't Arrow. This isn't Arrow. If this was The Flash, I'd be like, okay, the afterlife kind of makes sense because it'd be in the Speed Force, and that's something they've established. That's something that they could play with. But Arrow, they've never established this afterlife concept before, so when it happens, this is ridiculous to me. It's dumb. And what's worse is that we never see it either. Like, it would have been a bit better, I guess, if they would have set it up in Crisis, where after Crisis after Oliver died, they show him go to the afterlife. But we don't see that. So Felicity just goes to the afterlife and Oliver's there. Like, is he actually there? Or is that just, like, basically a Force ghost? Like, what's going on with Oliver in this reality? I don't know what to tell you guys. I hate to be so negative. I really do. Because this is my favorite show of all time. I was, you know, I wanted to like this ending, but unfortunately I don't. I mean, the ending, the episode itself isn't half bad. Like, as a series finale, it's not half bad. But I just have so many issues, and this ending really was the final nail in the coffin, and I think that this last scene completely squanders everything for me. And it's such a shame, because I wanted to love this, and I wanted this to have an ending that felt true to the show and true to the characters, but unfortunately, it's just not. And I think that's representative of the season as a whole. I think this season was not true to the show. It wasn't true to the characters, and it ended up being this thing that they did purely because they wanted to do 10 more episodes, and they wanted a whole show where they could completely dedicate setting up the crossover, this big crossover that they were going to do, and they could set up this spin-off show that nobody even really asked for, and it feels ridiculous to me, and I'm just so tired of it. And unfortunately, while I wanted to love this, I just couldn't, and that's the way it is. And I wish I could be better than that, but unfortunately, I just can't. But what did you guys think about the series finale of Arrow? Make sure to let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Did you love it, or were you disappointed with it like I was? Make sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to see more DC content like this, I mean, obviously no more Arrow videos now, but, you know, that's that. But if you want to stay tuned for more DC TV content like this, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss an upload from me. And I also want to thank you guys for sticking with me all the way with these Arrow reviews. I've been doing videos on Arrow since season 5, so to stick with me, you know, for 3 years, it really means a lot to me. And I want to say thank you for sticking with me with every single video that I've made on this channel for Arrow, but let's see where it goes from here. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it around with any of the DC fans you think may enjoy this content, and I hope to see you guys again next time.